Let's dive deeper into the autonomic nervous system, the freeze response, symptoms, emotions, and why the release process is the fastest way to heal. In fact, it already started. You're on your way. So to start at the beginning, when you were a little child, you somehow learned that expressing your emotions wasn't accepted, safe, easy, or nice. For example, when people said things like, please don't cry, or everything is all right, or no reason to be afraid, we learned that it was not accepted. And instead of releasing these emotions, we stored them inside of the body. But over time, the body became highly uncomfortable because of all these disturbing emotions. And what we did then is that we needed a way to deal with that. And one way is to, for example, start overthinking. Because by living inside of your mind, you don't really feel your body and the discomfort. But we could also develop certain things like perfectionism, pleasing, performing, you name it. And all of these behaviors are called coping mechanisms. And in a way, they represent fight, flight, or hide. And these behaviors are highly addictive as well. So we become addictive to a state of chronic stress. That fight or flight mode also represents survival mode. So we run away from ourselves. We fight ourselves. The danger becomes inside of you. So over time, we teach our brain that these emotions are indeed very, very dangerous and that it is better not to experience them. And then we can put them in the unconscious mind, meaning that they are there, but you don't really consciously experience it. So instead of experiencing the emotions, we immediately feel drawn to do a certain behavior. For example, distracting, or maybe even binging, or anything like that. And that becomes our personality. That becomes the character that you think that you are, based on outrunning yourself. The problem, however, is that no matter how hard you fight, or no matter how hard you run away, as soon as you stop, you arrive back at this moment, yourself. You can't fight yourself, you can't outrun yourself. And the habit of suppressing your own emotions and pushing them away will only become stronger. And it doesn't last long before you start doing that with almost everything. And that means that we store a lot of stress and tension in the body while we stay in survival mode. But then, at a certain moment in life, your body had enough, or you might have entered a small period of safety. And that led to your body wanting to start a release process. For some people, the stress was just overwhelming. Maybe in lockdown, the fear of losing your job, maybe the bad relationship. It was all too much. The body couldn't hold it anymore. And the body started a purging process. For other people, a holiday created a moment of safety and relaxation. And instead of being in survival mode, you relaxed and the pressure could come up. Unfortunately, however, we have conditioned ourselves and we have taught our brain that these emotions are dangerous. And then the limbic brain steps in to save the day, to create a protection mechanism. So when I had a chronic illness, I was doing research a lot. I committed every day at least 1 hour of my time into reading all kinds of stuff. And after a while, I stumbled upon research, actually very old research, about the limbic brain. The limbic system in the brain is responsible for processing emotions, also adding instinctive behaviors to that, related to memories to survival mode. So this is a very primitive part of the brain that is being activated in survival mode. When this part of the brain is overstimulated, it can create a lot of tiny changes in the body that can have a massive effect. But these tiny changes are not irreversible, they're not permanent, and they can be undone almost immediately. The body is, after a long period of suppressing emotions and being in survival mode, ready to release the suppressed and stored stress from the body. And this is a very good thing, because we want you to feel amazing. You'd want to feel light. You want to have a vibrant life where you actually feel amazing and powerful. We don't want to have a life in survival mode with constant stress. Unfortunately, however, you're stuck in this process because the limbic system detects these emotions and sees it as a danger. And it then creates tiny changes in the body. And these changes are not permanent. I have to emphasize that. These changes are there for your protection. They protect you against these emotions. So you enter the freeze response of the nervous system because you can't really do anything. And according to the instinctive part of your brain, the place where you are safe is in your bed. So it's creating these symptoms to make you go to bed because that's the place where you are safe. But if the symptoms were only mild, then you probably would just continue your life. And therefore, these symptoms are extreme. According to Steve Ozanich and other researchers who measured these symptoms, the pain of someone with, for example, fibromyalgia is just horrible. These are the worst of the worst symptoms that you can experience. Think about depression, extreme vertigo, migraine, post-exertional malaise, fatigue, all kinds of pains. And these symptoms make living impossible. And therefore, you have to withdraw yourself from life because life is dangerous. Go to your bed. It's the only place where you can be. You're in the freeze response right now. The problem, however, is that the dangers are not outside of yourself. So it's not the activity, or it's not talking with the neighbor, or working, or anything like it. It's inside of you. They are emotions. And they can be triggered by activity, by working or going on an interview for a job. But they are ultimately inside of you. And that means that the freeze response doesn't work here. But because these symptoms are so extremely overwhelming, you start getting a secondary emotion related to the symptom. For example, fear. Fear of the symptom or the fear of losing your life. But then you have more emotions inside of your body. More emotions mean more symptoms. And this becomes a downward spiral where you can really fall into a deep pit of darkness. But if you understand that these symptoms are basically a protection mechanism and not permanent, that there is nothing terribly wrong with you, that you just need to reprogram the limbic brain that these emotions are indeed okay, you can at least stop the extreme stress response and resistance and the emotional reaction towards your situation. Therefore, the first step is always, of course, creating safety and those kind of things, but also to educate yourself about what's actually going on. So the emotions basically just want to leave your body. But in order to do that, you must feel them, you must process them, you must express them. And after suppressing something for over a decade, it's not a minor emotion. It can be very overwhelming. And therefore, when you just start to connect with these emotions, your symptoms might amplify. It's like the brain saying, no, don't go there. You know what? I just increase your symptoms. And therefore, a lot of the healing modalities out there are basically just about trying to avoid you from crying. So a lot of programs are about distracting you from emotions. But that is, again, fight, flight, or hide. Meaning you have to go back to a stressful state of being in order to stop the purging of the stress. Going back to your old life and see if you can find a more advanced way to push these emotions back inside of your body. But that doesn't mean that your life becomes any better. It still becomes a life where you're stuck inside of your mind, where you're doing a lot of stressful behavior and you're basically not thriving. So actually, you have no other way. You need to embark upon this release process. And this is a wave pattern where you have a symptom, you find the underlying emotion, and then you let it go, and then you feel better until the next layer shows up and you develop another symptom. And maybe every once in a while you get a plateau and you need something extra to break through that. But that is the release process. And we do whatever we can in the release program to make this process as smooth as possible, to not distract with all kinds of secondary emotions or thoughts related to the symptoms, but to really go to the root emotion behind every symptom. And we can really find them inside of your body. And we can really make you experience an increase of emotions by briefly connecting with it, but also by completely releasing the underlying emotion. You can become symptom-free. That is because the limbic system will no longer detect a danger when a danger is gone. And then these tiny changes in the body will just vanish and symptoms will be gone. So in order to work with the release process, you would need to make your body safe. You would need to make the stress safe, the symptoms safe, and to embark upon the release process by learning a lot of tools to release actively stress from your body. So the stuckness of not being able to release and go further in the purging process is called a chronic illness. You don't really move forward. Your body is ready, but your brain is in resistance. And that is a chronic illness. You develop all kinds of symptoms, and maybe you already had some symptoms from being in survival mode for a longer period of time. Therefore, I'd like to talk about 4 different types of symptoms that together form your chronic illness. And the first group of symptoms are called mind-body symptoms. These are the symptoms that are being created in the freeze response of the nervous system through the limbic system of the brain to make you go to bed and to make you experience extreme symptoms. The migraine, the fatigue, the pain. And it's good to know that fatigue and pain are always created in the brain. If you cut your finger, then the limbic system in the brain will make sure that you are going to feel pain inside of your finger. And that is to protect you against hurting your finger any further. The same counts for fatigue. This is also a protection mechanism to make sure that you don't overexhaust yourself. Other common mind-body symptoms are depersonalization, vertigo, depression, and burning mouth syndrome. And these are the symptoms that you can eventually over time switch on and off. And that is just so empowering. Then the second group of symptoms are stress symptoms. And these symptoms are the consequence of staying in the fight or flight mode for a longer period of time. So that means you're not in the rest and digest mode. So you might feel that in your digestion, because when you are in fight or flight, digestion isn't a priority because you're basically running for your life or fighting for your life. So the digestion isn't going that well. And you might develop deficiencies, poor digestion, poor sleep as well, maybe tinnitus. And these symptoms usually slowly improve when you enter the rest and digest phase of the nervous system. So when you enter the rest and digest phase of the nervous system, your body can become really heavy. Maybe you develop a fever to fight off some bacteria or other stuff. And I call these symptoms healing symptoms. So it's good to anticipate on that. Otherwise you think like, what am I doing wrong? Suddenly I develop a fever, suddenly I'm very tired, but that's all good. These are just healing symptoms. And then the next group of symptoms are called organ symptoms. This means that an emotion is ready to be processed. And until you do that, it's waiting at an organ to be processed because we process emotions as well via our organs. If the emotion is, for example, at your heart, you might develop POTS. Or when the emotion is at your lungs, you might get shortness of breath. And as soon as you start processing these emotions, then you'll notice that the improvement is almost instantly because the emotion is gone and the organ functions great after that. Every label that we are talking about, whether it is a syndrome like mast cell activation syndrome, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, long COVID, is basically just a collection of symptoms. And they're trying to describe the symptoms that you are having without offering a solution. It might make you feel seen and heard in the beginning, like, no, these symptoms are not in your mind or in your head. These symptoms are actually very real. But after that, we're sort of stuck. And it's not even really that great into describing your symptoms, because you basically get a list of symptoms and maybe you have 4 of these symptoms from that label and a few from the other label. And that's why most people ask me the question whether they have, for example, chronic fatigue syndrome or not. And therefore, I think that these labels are not helpful. Like, they don't offer a solution. They're not even great at describing your problems. And therefore, I think that we need to get rid of it. Instead, talk about your symptoms, because we can work with the symptoms, but we can't work with the labels. And that means that from now on, you no longer have a chronic illness. Congratulations. And that's not wishful thinking, although it sounds funny. But from now on, we're dealing with symptoms. And every symptom has an underlying stressor or emotion. Find the exact stressor. That's what we're doing in the release program. And the symptom will fade away or immediately decrease. But don't put too much pressure on yourself, because the healing process takes time. You need to start developing some trust in the process and in your body. And therefore, most people experience a full release within the first 3 months, but everyone more or less needs a year to become good at it. So you no longer have a chronic illness. Instead, from now on, we're just playing. We're playing with the symptoms. And every symptom can be released. It doesn't mean that you manage that, but you can. And that's so empowering. But don't put too much pressure on yourself, because you need to go back to your old life, to survival mode. Breathe. No pressure here. We can't heal in a rush. Take your time and really start playing. Start playing with these symptoms. Start investigating what is going on. Where do you feel stress inside of your body? What is it actually? Is it already an emotion? And we start in the release program as well by teaching our brain that these emotions are okay. And therefore you start becoming aware of them. And this is in the beginning uncomfortable, because you have programmed yourself for over a decade that these emotions are not good and that you don't want to feel it. But they are always in the unconscious mind. And by retraining what you are aware of, you can become aware of the things that have been there for many, many, many years. And that's, of course, in the beginning uncomfortable. But after you've felt it through with the tools from the program, you can release it. So I think that this is a very empowering program. And I'm so glad that you're here. And I'm really glad that we can help you. So let's embark upon this journey together.